Hey guys, it's Justine here from I Should Read That, and today I'm going to be doing my July book haul. So July is an interesting month because I brought in so many books. So many books this month. A ton of books were sent to me either by authors or publishers, and I picked up a fair few books, but they were, again, mostly gift card money from last month. So I didn't spend a lot of money on books technically this month, but I have a lot of stuff to show you here. Part of this is because YALC was this month, and I'm going to do a separate video for my YALC books because I picked up 30 books at YALC, which is actually not too bad compared to what I did last year and what other people have done, so it's totally fine. There's a lot there, so I'm going to do that separately. That might be up by the time this video is up, or it will be coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. So in this video, I have, I believe, 31 books to show you. So I'm going to do this quickly because I feel like these videos tend to go on so long. So I will just show it to you, maybe talk about it briefly, and then we'll move on very quickly. So hopefully this video won't be too long. To start with books that I bought for myself this month because they're actually significantly, well, kind of significantly less books that I bought for myself than I was sent this month. So let's get started. First up, we have a book that proves that an author's presence on Twitter is an incredibly valuable tool because I have been watching this author and his Twitter shenanigans with two other authors for many years now. I decided to finally pick up his latest book. So this is The Armored Saint by Mike Cole. So this is a novella. It is the first in a series, and it is about a young woman named Heloise who is kind of a village girl and her town is destroyed by demons. So I imagine she's going to, judging by the World of Warcraft-esque armor that she's wearing here, I'm judging she's going to sort of get revenge, become this incredible warrior character, and I'm very excited for this. I've never read anything by Mike Cole before, but he is I believe he's an ex-Marine, so he writes lots of military fantasy, which is something that I love but don't read enough of, and I think that this is going to be great. Next up is one of my most highly anticipated books of the year. I'm so excited to finally have my hands on this. This is by one of my favorite authors, and I met her at this event, and it was an amazing experience. If you know anything about me, you might know exactly what this is. This is Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky Chambers. I'm so excited to read this book. It's going to be so amazing. If you don't know about Becky Chambers, she writes, I think she's the only author that I can think of off the top of my head who writes uplifting science fiction. It's just a future where people just get on with their lives. Humans are sort of not at the top of society, they're not at the bottom of society, they're very much mixed in with everyone else, and they have their moments of sort of, action and whatnot, but they're really about people, they're about characters and cultures and how everyone interacts, and they're wonderful books. So this is the third in this Wayfarers series. It starts with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. The next book is A Closed and Common Orbit, which is my favorite. I have been waiting for this for so long. She signed it, I met her, she's wonderful. She's just a great person. I'm so nerding out because she's one of my favorite authors. I'm definitely going to read this in the month of August, and I cannot wait to see what she comes up with in this book. Next up is a book that I did not buy. It's kind of almost self-explanatory in a way, but this is Mrs. Dalloway. This is by Virginia Woolf. I'm actually reading a Virginia Woolf book right now. This is the only one of hers that I have read in the past. This was just in a pile of free books at work, so I picked it up because I really enjoyed reading this when I was at university. It's a stream of consciousness novel about a woman named Mrs. Dalloway who's just going about her day in London. I really liked this. I wanted to own a copy, and I'd really like to reread it too. Next we have another classic, but it's more of a modern classic. This is The Night Manager by John le Carré. So this is the book that inspired the TV show by the same name, which I believe was Tom Hiddleston and Hugh Laurie. I haven't actually seen it. I've heard it's great. I'd really like to watch it, but I'm terrible with TV, as Scottish Fiancé will tell you with some frustration. But it's a spy novel. All of his books are spy novels. They're kind of like the anti-James Bond. They're not like the super sexy spy novels. They're very sort of political, and I have never read any of them before. I'd very much like to. I did actually start this, but then had to pack it in my suitcase, so I didn't end up finishing it. So I only got a few pages in, but I'm going to pick this up very soon because I would love to read some of his books because I know lots of very smart people like my mother really enjoy them. Next, we have a book that was a recommendation from another book blogger. So this is Fly by Night, and this is by Frances Hardinge. Judith, who is of Chain Interaction, who I talk about all the time because we both live in Oxford and we go to events together, really, really loved this book. I've only read The Lie Tree by Frances Hardinge before. I have not read any of her other stuff, so I decided to pick this up because it sounds really promising. Fly by Night is about a sort of land in which books are very dangerous, and of course our main character, who is a young girl, has this hunger for words and hunger for books. So I believe that this is going to be all about kind of a revolution in this land. It's going to be all about books and words, and that sounds so wonderful because I love books about books. Next, we have a book that I started ages ago and wasn't quite for me, sort of in the midst of that whole vampire craze, which I did not get into at all, but I've decided to give it another chance because it takes place in Oxford, which is where I live. This is A Discovery of Witches. This is by Deborah Harkness. So I don't know much about this one, but it is, from what I know, a very, very popular book. It's going to be made into, I believe, a TV show, or maybe a movie, but I think it's going to be a TV show. I'm very curious. I think that I'm a little bit less of a brat than I was at the time that I tried to read this book, so I'm going to give it another shot and see if I like it, because if I do, I believe the trilogy is complete. All I know about this one is that it's about a world in which sort of paranormal creatures like witches and vampires and werewolves exist, and it takes place in Oxford, which is fantastic, and it's all about a manuscript and I believe some sort of forbidden romance, so that should be very interesting. I am very hit or miss with this kind of book, so we'll see what I think. Next up is a book that I also bought because I really like the author on Twitter, and I read another book that was a East Asian inspired fantasy, which was The Poppy War, earlier this year, and I have this craving for more books like that, so I ended up picking this up. This is Jade City by Fonda Lee. The synopsis on the back of this book is one that I particularly like because it is fairly vague, but it sounds like this book is about a world in which jade is a very sought after stone. It's something that enhances the power of warriors. So jade is very, very strictly controlled by two particular families, and a war erupts because of it. So I don't know much about this one because, again, it is a little bit vague, which I love. But it sounds like something that's going to be very interesting. It sounds like something I'm going to like very much, so we'll see how this goes. It has come highly recommended. Next up, we have Knife of Dreams by Robert Jordan. This is book 11 in the Wheel of Time series. I am currently working my way through the audiobook of book 10 in the Wheel of Time series, and that is, oh my goodness, what is it? It's Crossroads of Twilight. There's 14 books and a prequel in the series, so sometimes I lose track of the titles a little bit. It's really, really difficult to describe Wheel of Time succinctly. However, it is kind of everything that you think of in fantasy that's not Tolkien. It is the long books, it's the long series, it's the kind of farm boy of destiny, it's the magic and, you know, these incredible descriptions of clothing and this epic, epic adventure. And although they are slightly problematic as a reader today, I love the hell out of these books. So I'm very much looking forward to finishing the series. So this should be really fun to get to when I get to it. Next up we have Sleeping Beauties, and this is by Stephen and Owen King. I love Stephen King. It's his new book. It was in paperback and it was buy one get one half price, so I just bought it because of that. Sleeping Beauties is essentially about a virus that puts all of the women in the world to sleep, and this kind of like filmy gauze forms around them. It kind of cocoons them, and if that gauze is disturbed at all, or if they are awoken, then they kind of go rabid. So I believe that this book is about the one woman who has not had this happen to her. So it should be really interesting. I'm not a huge fan of kind of The Last Woman because that makes me a little bit nervous just because of the way that those books tend to play out, but I'm very interested in this one. It's another chunky Stephen King book, so it'll probably take me a while, but I've heard good things, so we'll see how it goes. Next, we have a book that I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. So this is Grim Tales for the Young and Old by Philip Pullman. So essentially this is Grim Tales edited by Philip Pullman, which sounds fantastic. I love this cover. I think this cover is wonderful. I've been wanting to get this for ages. I've never gotten around to it, so I picked it up while I was at the airport when I was going to Copenhagen. The last book is a book that needs no introduction. This is the 20th anniversary edition of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. It's the Ravenclaw edition. You can see the sprayed edges. You know how I feel about sprayed edges. I have the Philosopher's Stone as well, so I had to get this one to go with it. It's just a really nice edition, and I bought it because I can't resist it. That is it for books that I bought for myself this month. So next we're going to go to books that were sent to me by publishers or authors or in subscription boxes. So first up, I have a trilogy to show you guys. So this was sent to me by Pan, and this is the Dark Gifts trilogy by Vic James. So this is Gilded Cage, Tarnished City, and Bright Ruin is coming out. If it's not out now, it's out very, very soon. So this series, as far as I know, is quite popular in the UK, and it is essentially, as far as I know, it is a kind of Orwellian-esque version of London and England, and there is magic as well. It's got these kind of aristocratic families, and the sort of lower classes are sort of forced into an indentured servitude for 10 years' time. I believe it's 10 years' time. So I believe this is about a brother and sister who have to go and serve one of these families. I know that it is quite dark, and I know that it's probably going to break my heart. I believe the hashtag that's going with Bright Ruin, which is this last one here, is like, don't kill my favorite, which I think is wonderful. I love books that do that. I love it when authors will go and kill favorite characters because it makes it feel so much more real. I really, really appreciate that, even if it does break my heart a little bit. The next trilogy that I have here is one that's kind of funny because I hadn't heard of it before, and now that I have heard of it, I see it everywhere. I see it in every bookstore. It's so funny how that works out. So this is the Relic Guild trilogy. This is by Edward Cox. So we have the Relic Guild, we have the Cathedral of Known Things, and we have the Watcher of Dead Time, which all of these titles are fantastic. From what I know, the Relic Guild was actually a debut novel, and it is apparently a fantastic debut. So I'm very much looking forward to these. They're apparently kind of like steampunky, which I don't read a lot of steampunk, not for lack of trying. I can never seem to get my hands on steampunk novels. They look really fantastic. They have really cool covers as well, which is always a plus. And I think that it's going to be really interesting to read something that I haven't heard about, because I feel like a lot of books that I acquire, I buy them because I hear other people talking about them, but for this one, I haven't heard that at all. So this should be really fun because I actually get to dive into it blind without knowing anything about it, which is really an experience that you don't get very often as a book blogger. The next two books that I have here are by the same author, and it is her debut novel and her most recent release, which came out very, very recently. So this is Raw Blood by Katrina Ward and Little Eve by Katrina Ward. So these are both very kind of chilling, gothic, spooky novels, which I absolutely love. I want to read these very soon, but I also feel like maybe September, October time will be the perfect time to read these, so we'll see. Next up, I have the sequel to a book that I read and really, really enjoyed. I believe it was earlier this year. This is Friendly Fire by Gavin Smith. This is the second book in the Bastard Legion series. So I read the first book, which is just called The Bastard Legion. I believe it was earlier this year, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's kind of fun military sci-fi. It has a fantastic female lead who's kind of crazy, but also kind of not. It's slightly hard to explain, but she's really, really self-aware, but she's doing these batshit crazy things. So this book is almost kind of like Suicide Squad in space, and it is about, in the first book, our main character goes and steals a prison transport vessel, and she essentially takes all the prisoners hostage and puts bombs around their necks and makes them her own mercenary squad, which is awesome. This is great because there's a lot of tension in it. There's a lot of sort of, these people obviously don't want to be at her beck and call, but they also don't want to have their heads blown off. So there's a lot of tension between her and between the prisoners. There's a lot of action, and there's a lot of very kind of like snappy dialogue as well. Next up is a book that was sent to me by an author. This is The Gilded King, and this is by Josie Jaffrey. First of all, let's go ahead and marvel at this cover because it's really fantastic. Gilded King is a young adult dystopia fantasy novel from Josie, and this is going to be the first in a series. So our main characters in this book are Julia and Lucas, and Julia lives in the Blue, and the Blue is the last city in the world, and things are not going well. It sounds really interesting. It sounds like it pulls together all the sort of elements of dystopia and fantasy that I really, really love. I don't know much about this one, and I am extremely, extremely excited to read it. Next up, we have one of my most anticipated books of the year by one of my new to me authors, one of my favorite authors that I've read this year. This is Foundry Side by Robert Jackson Bennett. So you have heard a million and one times how much I love the Divine Cities trilogies, City of Stairs and City of Blades, and eventually City of Miracles when I feel emotionally ready to read that book. So Foundry Side is going to be the first book in the Founders trilogy, which is going to be a brand new book. I don't think it's in the same universe. I think it's completely separate. This is another book that's a little bit vague on the details in the back, which is fantastic, seriously. This is about a girl who is a thief and a fugitive, and she lives in a city called Tavan, and she one day steals the wrong thing and discovers something terrible. That's really all it says on here. I cannot wait to read this book. I am going to be on the blog tour on the 23rd of August, so definitely go ahead and check out my review then. This book comes out on the 22nd of August. This is going to be great. I'm really excited, and I've already heard amazing things about this. I cannot tell you how excited I am to read this book. So the next book that I have to show you is an interesting one. This is another one that I got at the Orion Blogger event, and this is not a new book, but it is a re-release of an older book. So this is Sword Point, and this is by Ellen Kushner. So Sword Point is kind of a swashbuckling fantasy novel. It's got politics, it's got bloodshed, it's got violence, it's got all these amazing things that I love. I think this was written in the 70s. This originally came out in 1987, so again, it's a re-release of an older book. It's got a blurb from George R. R. Martin on the front, which is like the dream. So I am really excited for this. This is one that I haven't heard of, even though it is an older book, but I love anything that is described as swashbuckling. Next up, we have another book that is a re-release. So this is Blood in the Mist by Hope Mirrlees. Blood in the Mist is about a town in England where two rivers meet, and one of those rivers, which is the Dapple, is where the land of Fae exists. And this town, Blood in the Mist, is a town that tries to reject anything that's considered as other, so anything that comes from this particular side. So our main character is Nathaniel, and he's a dreamy and melancholy man, and he's deliberately ignoring a vital part of his own past, a secret he refuses to even acknowledge. But with the disappearance of his daughter and the long overdue desire to protect his son, he realizes Lud is changing and something must be done. So this sounds wonderful. This sounds kind of like Stardust, which is one of my favorite books, and I just love kind of like the English fairy tale. This sounds like it's going to be wonderful, and I would love to learn more about this author because apparently she's kind of an amazing person. Next up, we have my fairy loot book for this month. So this is Heart of Thorns by Bree Barton. This is one that I had not heard of before the fairy loot box came in. So this book takes place in a land in which only women can use magic, and those women are hunted down. So our main character, Mia, is one of those women who hunts down people who can do magic. So one day Mia discovers that she has been selected to become the queen of the land. She has to marry the prince, which is not a role that she even remotely wants. So she's trying to escape from her wedding day when she discovers that she actually can do magic, and she has to escape and she has to uncover the secrets of her past. This sounds great. It's got a beautiful cover. It's got sprayed edges. It's one of those books that I think I'm probably going to end up really liking. I just like the sound of it so much, so we'll see how this one goes. I'm very curious because I've heard literally nothing about this book. So the next book that I have is another one of my most anticipated books of the year, and I'm like beside myself with excitement to have this in my hands. This is The Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames. So Kings of the Wild was his debut novel, which came out, I believe, in 2017, and is fantastic. I read it fairly recently, and I just loved it for so many reasons. It's incredibly funny, it's incredibly heartfelt, it has great characters, it's kind of like that classic fantasy setting, which we don't see very often. One of my kind of only complaints about that book is that there were almost no female characters, and the female characters that we got either had no screen time or just were kind of mediocre. So I think that this book is going to solve that. I can't really talk about this one without spoiling the first, although I feel like if you even start the first book, you know who this is about, so it's fine, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to say I'm really excited. There's going to be a lot of women in this book, so we'll see how it stacks up against the first one. I think it's going to solve my one problem that I had with Kings of the Wild. Next up, we have a book that I'm extremely curious about. It was described as Love Island in space, which, like, put anything in space and I'm going to be very, very interested in reading it. This is Ascension, and this is by Victor Dixon. So this book is basically about almost like a competition to be paired up coupled up for life to go and colonize Mars, which sounds like such a creepy but really cool and interesting concept. This is a young adult novel. This is one that I believe has been getting some very good reviews. One of my friends, Asha, recently read it and really liked it, so I'm very curious about this one. I don't really know what to expect, but I think it's going to be fun. So next up we have a book that is not a sequel, but is kind of the follow-up book to a book that came out last year. So this is The Blue Salt Road, and this is by Joanne M. Harris. The Pocket Full of Crows is a novella just like this that came out last year and is inspired by one of the child ballads. So the child ballads are, I believe it's like 300 English and Scottish ballads. They're folklore. So that focused on one of those ballads, this focuses on another. And from what I know, because it doesn't say much here, but I recall from the Orion event they talked about this book, this is going to focus on Selkies. And Selkies are, if you don't know, usually women who are sort of seals by day but can take off their skin and become human by night. But I believe that this is going to focus on a male Selkie, which is very cool because it's always women, it's always these kind of female characters that we see. So I'm very, very interested in this. Again, I really liked Pocket Full of Crows. I think that this is going to be fantastic, and also like this is beautiful. Look at this. Next we have The Real Town Murders, and this is by Adam Roberts. This book is about a kind of near future England and something that's kind of a successor to the internet called The Shine, which is incredibly addicting. So this book is about a woman named Alma who is a private detective, and she ends up getting sort of pulled into this political conspiracy and coup, and like it just sounds incredibly fascinating. It's one of those stories that I really love that's kind of a detective who gets in too deep. And it's a sci-fi novel, which makes it even better. And this just sounded really, really interesting. So I'm very curious to read it. It's actually not very long. It is just over 200 pages long. I think that this is going to be a really fun and interesting read. This is an author I've not read before. So the next book is a book that sounds so much like a Neil Gaiman book in the best way possible that I am so excited to read it. This is The Ninth Circle, and this is by Alex Bell. So to me this sounds a little bit like Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman, which is one of my favorite books ever. It's about a man who sort of wakes up in a shabby flat in Istanbul, and there is a fortune in cash on the kitchen table. There is blood all over the floor. He has no idea who or where he is. As he's trying to discover sort of who he is, he begins to see some very strange and impossible things, and things become darker and darker from there. This, like, also, again, great cover. This just looks fantastic. This is one that I haven't seen before, and I know I would pick this up in a bookstore. It just looks amazing. It sounds so intriguing. It's almost kind of like Neverwhere meets The Raw Shark Text, which is an amazing book. You should totally read if you haven't picked that up. And I am super intrigued by this. I don't know what to expect, but I think it's going to be fantastic. The very last book that I have to show you is one of the sci-fi masterworks. So this is Raft by Stephen Baxter. So this book is about a spaceship from Earth that slips through a hole in space-time and ends up in kind of another universe, and the book takes place 500 years later, and the sort of descendants of that original crew are still struggling to survive. This book follows a character named Reese who decides he's going to go exploring and discover something that may change everything. So this sounds really great. It sounds kind of space opera hard sci-fi, and I am very much looking forward to it. I really like the SF Masterworks series because they choose a lot of really interesting stuff. They choose a lot of really great stuff, obviously, but they have a really nice combination of very well-known stuff. So I believe Dune is in this series. I believe Hyperion is also in this series, but they do some lesser-known stuff, and it's a great way to discover classic sci-fi. So that is it for the month of July. I'm going to do, again, my YALC books separately because this video would be like an hour long if I decided to do them together. So in the comments below, let me know if you picked up any really great books. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you think, or maybe some suggestions on a place for me to start because I haven't read any of these yet. So I post bookish content to this channel fairly frequently, so hit subscribe and I will see you next time.